Well, good evening, everyone. Notes are being printed off for you and your wife, and then more notes. Anyone else need notes for tonight? Derek? Okay, good thing I think I printed off 3 of them. We're on page 45, yes. Page 45. Let's open in a word of prayer, and we'll get started. Yes. Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you that you have created us in your image. In the image of God, you created us, male and female. You have created us. And we get to represent you and be your image bearers in this world. Help us, Lord, as we go through this very, very difficult night, this incredibly horrific topic. I pray that you strengthen our hearts, that you help us, Lord, to tackle this topic that none of us wants to hear about, and yet it is important for us to know about, I believe. I pray that your Spirit would work in our hearts and help us and give us the comfort that only you can give. We thank you for this evening. We thank you for this time together. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Alrighty. We're on page 45. We are going through the sanctity of life at the beginning of life. And again, the doctrine of anthropology is the section that we're in. It's the doctrine of man, anthropology, the study of man. What is man? What are the implications of it? And in this topic, there are more ethical considerations than really in any other area of theology, which is why we're diving into this. And we're just kind of dipping our toes a little bit in the topic of ethics, because it's incredibly relevant and important and around us all the time. Like I alluded to a little bit ago, I don't want to go through this material that we're about to go through. The very next thing that we're going to talk about is actually really cool. But after that is going to be incredibly depressing. But then I've got a quote from Charles Spurgeon that's going to hopefully lift us out of the depths. So bear with me. We'll get through it. Any questions, comments, or concerns before we get into the notes? Okay. So we're on page 45 this evening to start off with. And I actually decided to take the time to copy out of Ethics for a Brave New World this chart that we're going to walk through a little bit. And it answers the question, what does the development of a baby look like? Of a fetus, of a child, of a preborn person. What does this development look like? And as you're going to see, we're going to get into quite a bit of detail, or at least detail for a theology class. I'm sure a medical textbook would have exceedingly more detail. But I thought this was important enough for us to just kind of glance through. So we start off with the conception. And here the father's sperm penetrates the mother's egg cell, and genetic instructions from both parents interact to become a new and unique individual who is not bigger than a grain of sugar. Day 1, the first cell divides into 2, and the 2 into 4, and so on. Days 5 through 9, the new individual implants in the mother's womb. The baby's sex can already be determined. On day 14, the mother's normal menstrual period is suppressed by a hormone produced by her own child. Isn't that interesting? 14 days in, and the child is already impactful enough that the hormones that the child is making is actually having an impact upon the mother. Okay, I will trust you on that one. I am not familiar with it, as you know. But yeah, absolutely. Day 18, the heart is forming. Soon the eyes start to develop. Day 20, the beginnings of the brain, spinal cord, and nervous system are laid. Day 24, the heart begins to beat. 24 days in. Day 28, muscles are developing along the future spine. Day 30, in the first month, the child in utero has grown 10,000 times to 6 to 7 millimeters or a quarter inch long. The brain has human proportions. Blood flows in the veins and is separate from the mother's blood supply. All within 1 month. Day 35, the pituitary gland in the brain is forming. Mouth, ears, and nose are taking shape. Day 40, the heart's energy output is 20% of the adult output. Day 42, the skeleton is formed. The brain coordinates movement of the muscles and organs. Reflex responses have begun. The penis has begun to form in male infants. The mother misses her second period. Day 43, brain waves can be recorded. Day 45, spontaneous movements have begun and the teeth are developing. 7 weeks in, lips are sensitive to touch, and the ears may already be taking on the family shape. 8 weeks, the child is well proportioned, small-scale baby, 3 centimeters or 1.125 inches long, sitting up, and a gram, about 1/30 of an ounce in weight. Every organ is present by 8 weeks. The heart beats sturdily. The stomach produces digestive juices. The liver makes blood cells. The kidneys begin to function, and taste buds are forming already. 8.5 weeks, fingerprints are engraved. They will grow larger, but they are unique and will never change. The eyelids and palms are sensitive to touch. 9 weeks, the child will bend fingers around an object placed in the palm. Thumb sucking begins and fingernails are forming. 10 weeks, the body is sensitive to touch. The child squints, swallows, furrows his or her brow, and frowns. Weeks 11, the baby urinates and makes complex facial expressions, even smiling. 12 weeks, the baby is capable of vigorous activity. He or she can kick, turn feet, curl and fan toes, make a fist, move thumbs, bend wrists, turn the head, open the mouth, and press the lips tightly together. Breathing has begun. 13 weeks, the baby is prettier and the facial expressions resemble the parent's. Movement is graceful, reflexes vigorous, the vocal cords are formed, although without air, the baby cannot cry. The sex organs are apparent. This is all in the end of the first trimester. Yes? Amniotic fluid. The reflex is the ability to, and I would imagine breathing fluid in and out actually hones and strengthens the diaphragm muscles to be able to handle air too. So that's the end of the first trimester, and just taking a step back. After all of this is done, it is perfectly commonplace for people to just take a pill and end all. It is common for, we'll get into those in just a little bit. I can already tell it's going to be rough. But that's the end of the first trimester, which, by the way, trimesters are a completely artificial measurement of a pregnancy. That was literally the Supreme Court saying, well, we think this would be good and this would be bad. So we talk about having judges dictate medical decisions. The Supreme Court created the trimester. And it's worked. So, no, I won't even dignify that with sarcasm. It is horrifically terrible. Texas heartbeat bill. Where is the heart beating on this? But it can be as early as 28 days. I missed that. No. 24. Day 24. A heart can start beating. And they're the ones that ratified it. Yeah. At 4 months, the baby can grasp with his or her hands. It can swim and turn somersaults. Months 4 through 5, the mother first feels the baby move. 5 months in, sleeping habits are noticeable. The slammed door will result in activity. The child responds to sounds and frequencies too high or too low for adults to hear. Babies born at this age have 6 months, fine hair grows on the eyebrows and head. Eyelash fringes appear. The baby's weight is about 640 grams or about 1 pound 6 ounces, and the height is 9 inches. This is the end of the second trimester. 7 months, eye teeth are present, eyelids close and open, eyes look around, hands grip strongly. The mother's voice is heard and recognized. 8 months, weight increases by 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. and the baby's quarters get very cramped. 9 months, the child triggers labor, and birth occurs usually 255 to 275 days after conception. On the 45 generations of cell divisions before adulthood, 41 have taken place. 4 more will come during the rest of childhood and adulthood. Gives a new definition to I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And you knew me in my own mother's womb. You knit me and formed my innermost. This is a little bit preview of future times, but just to lighten the mood just a little bit. I can't believe I'm actually going this route to lighten the mood, but we're going to talk about the doctrine of sin in a couple of weeks. And many people consider infants to be pure and innocent and not morally corrupt. We're going to see the Bible says the exact opposite. But I do remember one pastor giving a sermon. It was actually the guy who was pastor before Tim Carnes at Calvary Bible Church, Jack Hughes. And he was talking about how the sin nature is just so apparent. And he gave the funny example of when you were in the womb and the umbilical cord hit you in the face and you just got angry at that umbilical cord. Why did you just hit me in the face? And you sinned even in the womb. Giving a little bit of a different perspective on it. And yet this is the work of God, is it not? This is the work of God in the creation and forming of human beings. And this happens thousands upon thousands of times every single day. This progresses. Me too. Okay. What are some of the various procedures used in these stages of abortion? The following descriptions come from Feinberg, Ethics for a Brave New World. I literally copied his descriptions of each one of these, and I attributed it, so it's not plagiarism because I'm telling you where I found it. But I would highly recommend Ethics for a Brave New World. I brought those 2 books last week, and if you want to know them, maybe I'll bring them again next week. Okay. RU 486 is also known as mifepristone, and when taken with another drug, misoprostol, it actually induces abortion. Mifepristone acts on the pregnant woman's body by blocking progesterone, a female hormone that is crucial to healthy pregnancy. Misoprostol, a prostaglandin, induces uterine muscles to contract and thereby end the pregnancy. The process involves several visits to the doctor, the first for mifepristone and the second for misoprostol. A further visit about 2 weeks later allows the doctor to confirm that the abortion has occurred. As part of this process, the woman can expect up to 2 weeks of bleeding and cramping, as well as such side effects as nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. This is not to be used after the 7th week. So if you look back, everything that happened on the first page, on page 45, you can take a pill and it'll end all. But after the 7th week, they need to use different terms or different procedures. Another one is the morning after pill, which is not the same as RU 486. The main function of the morning after pill is often described as preventing ovulation. If that were the case, it wouldn't be an abortifacient, but a birth or conception control pill. But the truth is that the high-dose pill works just as well to block implantation of the fertilized egg in the mother's womb as it does to prevent conception. So the morning after pill, you've got the conception, the conceived person, and then that fertilized egg implants into the uterine wall, and then it grows. So the morning after pill prevents and creates a hostile environment for that person to find out. D&C. I apologize, Mary and Alan. This is a bad night to come for your first time. Normally we have more fun than this. But yeah. And I'm including these because we need to face these facts. As Christians, we are pro-life and we have a proper theology, but we too sterilize these. D&C. This is one of the two preferred methods for aborting a fetus during the first trimester. The mother's cervix is dilated and the surgeon inserts an instrument to scrape the walls of the uterus, cutting the baby's body to pieces and removing the placenta from its place in the uterine wall. Suction. This is the other preferred method of abortion during the first trimester. According to some estimates, it is used in 80% of these abortions. It is often used in conjunction with D&C. The cervix is dilated and the suction tube is inserted into the womb. The suction tears the baby and his or her placenta from the uterus, sucking them into a jar. The force of the suction is 28 times stronger than a normal vacuum cleaner. It is possible in this method and D&C to identify human hands. If any of you saw the movie Unplanned, this is the procedure. And the other procedure that they showed in that was the RU-486 for the first abortion that she had. I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head. But she had a medical abortion, or a pharmaceutical abortion, and then a surgical abortion. Saline injection. This is the most commonly practiced method of abortion during the second trimester. Neither D&C nor suction can be practiced during the second trimester because of the danger of hemorrhaging. By the 4th month of pregnancy, the water bag or placenta has developed. A long needle is inserted through the mother's abdomen into the sac surrounding the baby, and some of the fluid is removed and replaced with a solution of concentrated salt. Baby breathes in it. It is poisoned by. Often the outer layer of skin is burned off. With saline injection, there is osmotic pressure that changes in the fetus, causing brain hemorrhages. It takes about an hour for the solution. They killed her. About a day later, the mother goes into labor and gets shriveled. Hysterectomy. This is the technique that must be used in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy because the baby is simply too large to use the other method. In light of Roe decision, it is legal in the United States to have an abortion into the 9th month of pregnancy. Hysterectomy is typically the technique used and medically is exactly the same procedure as a cesarean section. However, a C-section is done to save the life of a child. A hysterectomy is done to take it. Though the aborted fetus is alive, he or she is allowed to die of neglect or through some deliberate action. With the Supreme Court decision in Planned Parenthood versus Danforth in 1976, physicians have been given the right to do whatever they want. Prostaglandin. Another method is prostaglandin. It may be used at any stage of pregnancy. The substance prostaglandin is taken in some form and it induces labor. The result may be a delivery of a live infant who is allowed to die. Or prostaglandin may be used in conjunction with a saline solution to assure the birth of a dead fetus. Dilation and extraction, or dilation and evacuation. These are the methods used in partial birth abortion. They may be used without first delivering the baby. They are the methods used in partial birth abortions. They may be used without first delivering part of the baby and then puncturing its skull. The cervix may simply be dilated and forceps inserted into the woman. The forceps may grasp the whole baby, remove it at once, or it may remove the baby part by part. Abortion advocates want to sterilize this as a generally painless and routine procedure. Such is not the case. Least of all for this child who is ripped apart, cut to pieces, chemically burned, given brain hemorrhages, or just left to cry to death. The words of Charles Spurgeon are of such comfort when considering the despicable and atrocious butchering art of the abortionist. Here's what Charles Spurgeon said. Let every mother and father know assuredly that it is well with the child. If God has taken it away from you in its infant days, you never heard its declaration of faith. It was not capable of such a thing. It was not baptized into the Lord Jesus Christ. It was not capable of giving that answer of a good conscience towards God. Nevertheless, you may rest assured that it is well with the child, well in a higher and better sense than it is with yourself. The child is well without limitation, without exception, infinitely and eternally. We ground our conviction about infant salvation very much upon the goodness of the nature of God. We say that the opposite doctrine, that some infants perish and are lost, is altogether repugnant to the idea which we have of him whose name is love. If we had a God whose name was Molech, if God were an arbitrary tyrant without benevolence or grace, we could imagine some infants being cast into hell. But our God, who heareth the young ravens when they cry, certainly will find no delight in the shrieks and cries of infants cast away from his presence. Again, we think that eternal banishment of those dying in infancy would be utterly inconsistent with the known character of our Lord Jesus Christ. When his disciples put away the little children whom their anxious mothers brought to him, Jesus said, "Suffer little children and forbid them not to come to me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." By this he taught, as John Newton very properly says, that such children made up a very great part of the kingdom of heaven. When we consider that upon the best statistics, it is calculated that more than 1/3 of the human race die in infancy, and probably half the population of the world, if we take into calculation those districts where infanticide prevails, America, where abortion prevails, the saying of the Savior derives great force indeed. Of such is the kingdom of heaven. If some remind me that the kingdom of heaven means the dispensation of grace on earth, I answer, yes, it does. And it means the same dispensation in heaven too. Our Lord's prove that infants compose a great part of his family, and that he has a love and amiableness. I'm astounded at the grace of God and the amazing justice he demonstrates. How ironic that the most satanic institution our land has is adding people daily to heaven. And the same would go for miscarriages. The same would go for infants who die suddenly. The same would even go for little children, I would offer. And something that I was pondering lately was in Revelation, it says that every tribe, tongue, and nation is gathered around the throne of God. And yet, according to some estimates, languages are dying off at an alarming rate. So how is it possible that every single tongue is represented around the throne of heaven? By little children who know just enough of the language to be able to worship him in that. By little children who have heard their mother's voice in the womb and understood the language, or learned, at least in part, some of the language that she would speak to it and sing to it. Make no mistake, there are more people in heaven than there ever will be in hell. And the vast majority of those never saw the light, or only saw it a brief moment in time. Questions? Is abortion murder? Simply put, yes. Murder is the willful and intentional taking of an innocent life without a righteous or justified motive. Every part of this description applies to the abortionist and to the mother or those who are forcing her. Or being in an abortionist killing room and having a baby delivered who's crying on a table and left. That's where I like Spurgeon's sermon. That's one of the things in the London Baptist Confession of Faith. There's a firm statement that children who die in infancy are in hell. And I've heard other people waffle on that doctrine. I've heard people say, well, the Bible doesn't really tell us. But I heartily disagree. It is intrinsic in the character. And I have a hard time. Could God do it? His ways are above our ways. So is it possible? Of course it's possible. But is it in his character? No, it is not. To send any child to hell. And there's going to be more people in heaven than hell. And most of those people never saw the light of day or only saw it a few years. And in that we can take hope, right? I was talking with someone recently who is a firm, strong Christian, and she had an abortion before she became a Christian. And we were just marveling at the fact that she has a child in heaven that she's never met, but she will meet. Is there ever a case when abortion is wrong? You say, yes, there is. This may surprise, but yes, there are certain circumstances in which case a baby may be killed. The following is a non-exhaustive list of times in which an abortion may be acceptable to a Christian. It must be noted that this is not a requirement, only that it would be morally acceptable. It ultimately is up to the couple and their physician in such cases, but one of which that isn't optional is ectopic pregnancy. And that's where the fertilized egg implants not in the uterus but in the fallopian tube usually, and so it cannot grow normally without killing the mother. It'll kill both, exactly. So should we abort an ectopic pregnancy? Yes. Tragically, yes. That is a time when an abortion is not only justified but it's necessary, because it's the preservation of one life over the death of both. To save the mother's life is another case in which abortion is possible. The Bible never requires one person to give up their lives for another, and if the mother truly is faced with either dying or giving birth, then she is free to pick either. It must be noted that this is a very rare case in modern medicine. There was a point in time where the greatest cause of death for women was childbirth. And that was only up until about 100 years ago. Even in the early 1900s, the leading cause of death for women was childbirth. There is always a possibility. Yeah. In like manner, if a mother is diagnosed with cancer or some other disease and the treatment will kill the baby, she frankly is at liberty to take the treatment in the hopes of preserving her life. I do not believe an abortion due to birth defects is morally acceptable. Even holding a child for a few hours after it's born and then watching that life God created depart into eternity can be transformative time in the Christian life. We often shield ourselves from death so that it has no effect. Hannah, right, Dale? You guys have a crazy story about someone wanting to take her life before she was born. And we got the delight of seeing a beautiful girl here amongst us at this church. I absolutely love people with disabilities because they show us a simpleness of life, a one single direction. I remember there still is a young man at Calvary, our church in Los Angeles. His name's Arvin, and he's just a special. He can If you tell him your birthday, he can tell you the exact day of the week you were born. And he's always right. Or when your birthday is in 5 years, he will never forget your birthday once you tell him your birthday. Special young man. And just like the infants that die in infancy and the children that are born never seeing or die never seeing the light of day, I truly believe those with severe mental disabilities are also utterly saved. And that's whether they make a profession of faith or not, because it's in the character of God to save the helpless. Questions for reflection. What is our responsibility as Christians with regard to abortion? What is our civic responsibility? Should we just let it happen? Should we get up in arms? Should we go bomb abortion clinics? One of those I don't think any of us, two of those, I don't think any of us would agree with. We should be actively involved in the suppression and elimination as much as possible of this horrific. And there was a time when slavery was fully entrenched in the British Empire. We were just watching a movie about this recently, about the movie was Belle. A really sweet movie about an English captain who fathered a mixed race daughter with a slave and brought her to his uncle's manor. And he was Lord Chief Justice in the British Empire. And he was faced with a lower court. It was an insurance company and a slave ship captain. They were having a lawsuit, and it was appealed up to the King's Court, the highest court, where he was to give rule over it. And the ship, this is a historical event, this is why I'm bringing it up. The ship was a slave ship, and they jettisoned their cargo. And they killed, I think it was like 200 slaves, because an infection was spreading throughout the ship, and it was more cost efficient for them to claim the insurance policy on the cargo than to actually sell these human beings for a loss. And so this case was appealed up to the Chief Justice of the British realm, and he actually ruled in favor of the insurance company that denied the claim. And that was really the very first step towards the abolition of slavery in the United Kingdom. And if that could happen with such an entrenched enterprise, because slavery was fundamental to the economy, I believe that abortion could suffer the same fate. But ultimately, it's the Lord who will decide that and move people to do what is right or to continue in what is wrong. Hmm. Hmm. Thank you, Mike. Hmm. And for those of you watching, I'm sorry that you missed Mike's powerful and important story. Ask him about it if you about the shaman and the twins and the Navajo. A great story. I love that one, Mike. Thank you. How should we respond to a woman who confesses to an abortion? How should we respond to someone encouraging an abortion? And can the blood of Jesus cover the sin of it? Absolutely. And in fact, in this case, we actually get to comfort that repentant woman. Because the work that the evil thing that was done to her, and so many times these women get an abortion because they are forced into it. I firmly believe that many of these women would prefer not to, especially in the aftermath of it all. And it's forced upon them by family members, by boyfriends, by other external matters. Some of them are recalcitrant and hardened and delight in abortion. Those are the people that I cannot. There's this one YouTube channel, Apologia Studios. I've mentioned it a couple times, but they're the same ones that do cultish. And one of their things is going out in front of abortion clinics. And I love their channel. I love watching them interact with unbelievers. I love watching them interact with the false philosophies of our world. But the one that I just cannot stomach, the advocate side of the Planned Parenthood. The ones that are staunchly, abortion is not only a necessary, it's not just necessary, but it's good and to be delayed. I confess those are the most despicable people in my mind. But if someone comes to Christ, all of that is forgiven. Yeah. We have different conceptions. Huh? And not only that, the demonic delights in the destruction of the image of God. And the more image of God destroyed, the more delighted the demons are. Hmm. Yeah. Birth control. I would refer anyone weighing through the issues around birth control to read The Very Good Treatments in Both Ethics for a Brave New World and Christian Ethics by Wayne Grudem. The relevant information to our study in honoring the image of God and preserving human life centers around certain types of birth control. I would offer that most other methods of birth control are perfectly acceptable if they are practiced within the covenant of marriage and with mutual agreement of both husband and wife, right? Wife sneaking a birth control pill and saying, oh, I don't know why we're getting pregnant is not okay. It has to be by mutual agreement, both husband and wife. That said, there's one debatable method of birth control and another that's unacceptable. The first is oral contraceptives. And this is a debatable one because some drug companies advertise a double effect in preventing pregnancy. The first being prevention of ovulation so that there is no egg in which the sperm may fertilize. This is perfectly acceptable as no human life is created. The problem arises in the assurance that is given by many companies that there is a second effect of the pill that makes the woman's uterus unable to implant an embryo should an egg be released and fertilized. The second method, if true, does not seem to be acceptable as it is functioning in a like manner as the morning after pill above, causing an abortion. In the research that I have done, I believe that the second method of the pill is more advertising hype than actual reality, and the risks are such that it is morally acceptable for a Christian couple to use the pill for contraception. That's my opinion, and you can weigh that. And I realize, looking around this room, I don't mean to be insulting, but birth control is not really an issue for you guys. But you have daughters, and you have people within this church And we're actually about to get to a topic where there was a family in our church at Calvary that was a part of one of she was an elder's daughter, well versed in the faith, but they brought up surrogacy as just kind of a normal thing, that she was born without her uterus, and that was the way that she could have children one day in the future. And as we're going to see, I don't believe surrogacy is a viable alternative for Christians, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But there are people wrestling through these issues. And I'm not saying this as the hero of my own story, but by God's grace, I was actually able to convince that couple that that's not an okay thing for a Christian to do. And you know what they did instead? They adopted a kid. So that's a win, and I'm incredibly happy with the way that the Lord moved and worked in that situation. Yeah. There is definitely, and that's why the question that I was addressing here is it abortifacient? I don't believe it's abortifacient as it's more just advertising. At least that's the conclusion that I came to. But again, this is a conscience matter. For the pill, it's a conscience. The other one, an IUD, on the other hand, is not a conscience matter. The other more clear-cut form of birth control that's not acceptable are IUDs, or intrauterine devices. These devices can take many forms and designs, but the main method of action they use is to cause an inflammation in the uterine walls that make implantation impossible. As such, this is an abortifacient method of birth control and should be rejected. There are other ones that include hormones and things like that, but at the end of the day, the primary means of action is preventing implantation, which is abortive. Because we, again, believe that human life and the image of God is created at conception, or present at conception. Reproductive technologies. We'll go a little bit quicker, maybe. Any questions on birth control, arguments or fights, please stop me at any moment in time. The truly hard stuff is a little bit behind us, so these future ones are going to be applying some of what we've learned. But please stop me. I actually enjoy talking about these types of things because I think, when was the last time you heard anyone teaching on abortions, birth control, and reproductive technologies in a church? I have never, ever, and in fact, I'm the only person that I know of who's actually talked about these things. Maybe about the Crisis Pregnancy Center. There was one on transgenderism. I think so. Yeah, on transgender thing. Yeah, that was a good one. But I still claim the only person to actually talk about surrogates and artificial insemination and things like that. So don't take that from me. Actually, please feel free to. If other people can start teaching this stuff, I think we can have a much more reasoned church. Because we should be against a lot of these things, and we don't know that we should be against them. And some of these things we are against them, and we have no clue why we're against them. And so we need to talk about them more. Well, thank you for that, Dave. Wayne Grudem offers 3 principles in evaluating reproductive technologies. First, modern medicine in general is morally good. I'm happy we have penicillin. I'm happy that we have a polio vaccine. I'm happy for many different things from medical technology. Unless you're allergic to penicillin like my wife, in which case I'm glad that they have zithromycin or whatever other alternatives that there are around, until, of course, we create antibiotic-resistant ones on a grand scale, in which case we'll go to the Soviet method of creating, the viruses that infect bacteria. I'm totally spacing on that name. Huh? No. They're actually viruses that infect bacteria. And they look like little spaceships. They're wacky, wacky little things. But the Soviets used that during World War II. And so you find the macrophage, I think it is? Macrophage? Yeah, aren't they the ones? No, okay, that's a white blood cell, isn't it? I'm thinking of something totally different. Okay, yeah, I'm thinking of something different. But sorry, this is totally for free. Just a little stepping aside from the notes. But during World War II, our great innovation to keep our soldiers healthy and happy-ish was penicillin, antibiotics. Changed the way, because prior to World War II, the number one cause of death for soldiers was infection, not bullets. And so all of a sudden in World War II, when we can have standing armies that aren't falling to pieces and dying in the barracks, we can actually field more troops and actually win wars. The Soviets didn't have antibiotics. They had these other crazy little things that they realized you can actually find them at sewage treatment plants, which is kind of weird and gross, but they are a part of breaking down the bacteria that break down the waste. So you can find them like super easy. But they actually they discovered that if you give someone these viruses that infect bacteria, that they recover. So one day when we do create MRSA on every street corner, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, we'll have these other ones if someone's smart enough to remember history. Totally for free. Totally for free. Number two, we should treat the unborn child as a human person from the moment of conception. And 3, God intends that a child should be conceived by and born to a man and a woman who are married to each other. That last one's a big no-no in our culture, but it should be a big yes in the church. These 3 will be used in the following to help think through whether a given technology is acceptable or even if it can be amended to become acceptable. First off, artificial insemination by husband. This is the simplest and one of the most morally acceptable technologies. The husband supplies the sperm, which is then used to inseminate the wife's uterus, which then would result in an otherwise completely normal pregnancy. All 3 of the conditions above would be met. An alternative that does not seem to be acceptable is artificial insemination by a donor. Which one does that violate? Artificial insemination by a donor. Which one of those 3? By a husband and wife, yes. Here, a third party is introduced to the marriage and would go against the third criteria above, that God intends that children be conceived and born to a man and a woman in a marriage covenant. A third party is not accounted for within that original design. In vitro fertilization, big topic. And I actually did some research on this. So this was all of my Google searching. So if you find contradictory things, and I'm disappointed that my mom and dad are in Apple Hill right now because my sister is looking to go into this, so we might have to have a talking to about it, but that means we'll just have a talking to some other time. But IVF, this is the process of extracting a woman's egg or ovum from her body and then combining it with a husband's sperm in a laboratory. The result is an embryo or a conceived human being, though only being a single cell. The embryo is then taken from the laboratory and placed back into the woman's body with the hope that it will implant in her uterine wall and proceed as a normal pregnancy. Now, in the above description, all 3 of the above criteria are actually met. The egg and sperm come from a presumably married couple. The single embryo is respected as a person, and it happens to use modern medicine. If this is how in vitro normally worked, there would be no problem with it at all for Christian use. The problem arises, however, in that this is not the norm. A study in the UK found that the ideal number of eggs to harvest from a mother is 15. This means that the fertility doctor can create 15 people in their laboratory. One website frankly states, quote, "To a great extent, the more eggs we have to work with, the greater the chance that IVF will be successful. There are several issues involved with this. More eggs will give us more fertilized eggs, which results in more likelihood of having good quality, and women that respond well to the stimulation drugs sometimes also have better egg quality and therefore could be more likely to have high quality embryos," end quote. Now, note how human lives are treated as a commodity. Did you catch that as I was reading through that? That was an advertisement from a website for a fertility doctor. Usually in this case, the doctors don't have the right to do with the embryos as they do. And that's the logical inconsistency of it all, right? You take aborted parts sell them on the open market, which we know is happening. But create a single cell organism, or even allowing it to develop into a cluster of cells, many cells at times. And all of a sudden it's someone's property. And it's the property of the parent. And they are only allowed to do with that property as the parents allow. What is more, the success rate in vitro fertilization is nowhere near what I feel is reasonable. Quote, embryos from eggs of a 40-year-old woman had an implantation rate near 10 to 15%, while those from a 30-year-old had an implantation rate of 40 to 50%, according to national averages. And that comes from the Fertility Center of Las Vegas. The same website then goes on to claim that they see success rates in a given round of IVF at 70 to 80%. Why the discrepancy? They usually attempt to implant 2 or 3 embryos at a time. In some cases, if both or all 3 embryos do indeed implant within the mother's womb, a selective abortion may be made to select the stronger and seemingly healthier of the 2 or 3. Of the 15 eggs that are collected, maybe 2 or 3 will be used if the couple is fortunate enough to have success on the first round. The rest can be stored for up to 20 years in a freezer. This means, I suppose, that if a girl is born on that first round, she could adopt her sibling and give birth to him if she so desired. Welcome to our brave new world. One last consideration is cost. The average price of a round of IVF treatment is anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. Of course, the life of a child is priceless, but there are so many out there who need parents already. Do genetics mean that much? But that is probably too far for me to say. If a couple decides to attempt a round of IVF, I believe that it can be morally acceptable if only 1 embryo is created at a time, or if more are created, that all are given a chance at life. Under no circumstances is a selective abortion acceptable, and under no circumstances is it okay for a couple to create children that will waste away in a freezer for the next 2 decades and then be discarded into a medical. Questions, comments, concerns on IVF? That's a tough topic, by the way. I just said a lot of stuff that's going to make a lot of people angry. Because IVF is viewed as a morally neutral way. All of a sudden, doctors can allow mothers to have children that wouldn't be able to have children any other way. Anyone want to fight me on that? And it's okay if you want to marinate over it and find me sometime later in the back of the church. I'm totally fine interacting and talking with them. But there's plenty of couples that cannot have children by the normal, natural means and are considering IVF because it's presented as a miracle way of having children. I have in here an excursus, which is a fancy word of saying something cool that I found and figured I would copy it in full and allow you to read it in your own time. But this was an essay that actually came from Al Mohler on September 21st of 2020. So this is brand new. And basically, for the first time, we now have genetic tests that can dictate how good of health an embryo or fetus is going to have in the rest of their life. What sort of ramifications do you think that's going to mean for children everywhere going through IVF? All of a sudden, those selective abortions are going to skyrocket because all of a sudden, this embryo has a score that's higher than this one. And so we're going to use this one over that one. Or you want one with blue eyes and blonde hair versus the dirty races. Or we want the Ubermensch. And yes, I did just employ Nazi ideology into all of this because we are entering into a frightening time of medical technology. And especially in America, there is no regulation over these things. Zero regulation over genetic testing, genetic altering, genetic engineering. And so we are now in the era of the designer baby. They were scared of it 20 years ago. They had every right to be because we are now in a place where you are selecting who you want to give birth. And the implication is you're selecting who you want to kill. But they won't phrase it like that. So I would recommend that you go read through this by Al Mohler, but I don't have time to read through it to you, so that's your homework if you so choose to accept it. Skip with me over to page 55. I think we can get through surrogacy. Taking the technology of IVF to another level is the concept of surrogacy. Usually in such circumstances, a couple desires to have children, but the wife is either unable to be pregnant or it is unsafe for her health to be pregnant. As a result, her eggs are harvested, the husband's sperm is used in a normal IVF cycle. However, instead of using the wife's uterus, another woman's uterus is used to implant the embryos. This other woman is then the one who carries the child or children to full term and gives birth. Often a financial arrangement is made between the surrogate for not only medical bills, but compensation for the use of her body. Isn't that another term for prostitution? You can make a lot of money, I've heard, through surrogacy. Yeah. Oh my. Ugh. Living the American dream. Yeah. Because, yeah. Essentially, you're kind of intentionally having a child that's going to die in infancy. Like, that's kind of the equivalent. It's going to be taken away from you. And we're not designed to be that. We're designed for relationships. We're designed to have a child that we love and adore and pour our affections upon. We're designed to have spouses that we live for and sacrifice for and die for. We're designed to have these human family relationships. And when we start messing with that, bad things happen. Really bad things happen. And this process violates especially the third principle above, as it brings a third party into the marriage and child-rearing process. The second woman is not in the marriage covenant, and this goes against God's design for that union. Additionally, there is a social complication of parental rights in the fact that the surrogate may become attached to the child she gave birth to, resulting in court battles over custody. That has happened, by the way. This also is too reminiscent of the account in Genesis 16 of the mess made between Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. I started a little bit late, so I'm just going to go introduce our next topic because it's really the solution to all these problems, right? Well, if we ban abortion, then we're going to have so many unloved, uncared for, unwanted children. No, not if the church actually steps up and does what she has been called to do and fulfills James 1:30, I think it is. True religion is this: to care for, in the sight of God, is to care for orphans and widows in their time of need. So the answer to all of this is adoption, and the church has lost the doctrine of adoption. We've forgotten about adoption. We've pushed it to secular agencies. By the way, DCFS is a horrible, terrible organization. It's filled with people who are overworked and just worn out from the mess of human life and seeing the worst of people. Those social workers that are fighting for children to protect them are heroes. But the tragic thing is so often they just rubber stamp a person because they've seen it time and time again that it's an awful parent and they're going to have to make another visit and they're going to have to file all the paperwork on a second time anyway, so why not just make it the first time? And this child is nothing more than a number to me because I've gotten so hurt over the years. By God's grace, Marilyn was nothing like that. And I tear up every time I think of Marilyn, who is our social worker, with the county, who is actually a better social worker than the private agency that we were with, that was a Christian agency. The Catholic social worker with the county was a far greater help to us than the Christian Foster Family Association was for us. There was a time where, long story, but there was a time where I had written out a letter to send to the two social workers saying that we need to move these two precious dogs. And Krista even told Marilyn that we're going to have to find a new home for them. But Marilyn, by God's grace, refused to start the paperwork. And she sat on it and sat on it and sat on it for, I think, 2 weeks. Probably terrible things, and if someone found out, she would have lost her job. But in those 2 weeks, there was just enough time for the Lord to truly transform my heart specifically. And that's a long story for another time. But by God's grace, Marilyn was a bad social worker. And she was truly the best. And in talking with her afterwards, she's just like, I knew that you guys were going to keep them. I was like, I'm just going to sit on this and wait for them to come to their senses. And yes, definitely. So we'll talk at length about the doctrine of adoption in the soteriology section, which is the doctrine of salvation, but its relevance here is obvious. It is a doctrine that the church has lost sight of, and thus an ethical option for expanding one's family has been marginalized in the mainstream church. There has been a small revival of interest in adoption over the last few years, but sadly, like most evangelical trends, it was supplanted by social justice shortly after it was brought to the fore. Adoption has been a vital part of the people of God. Jesus himself was adopted by Joseph, one of the great unsung heroes of the faith. Countless others have brought little ones into their homes to rescue them from their prior life and give them a new and better way. Indeed, orphans and widows are a special protected class of people throughout the whole Bible. God cares for the fatherless, and we should too. Rather than spending thousands of dollars on ethically questionable reproductive technologies, we ought to be encouraging families, both young and old, to think about caring for the most vulnerable in our society and world. It's amazing how the reflection of you and your spouse transcends genetics. We were just talking about this today. Those two, they don't have a lick of my white, pasty genetic skin. And that's a really good thing because they don't need sunscreen as much as we do, as I do. But you know what? Those two, we have people, strangers that just come up to us and don't even anymore ask the question, are they adopted? Because they do kind of, sort of look like us. And they're growing to look like us more and more as the years progress. And so, what did I say? It was actually a really good line. Rather than spending tens of thousands of dollars on ethically questionable reproductive technologies, we ought to be encouraging families, both young and old, to think about caring for the most vulnerable in our society and world. It's amazing how the reflection of you and your spouse transcends genetics in their children. Those who have adopted can confirm that all too often those sons and daughters look all too much like their parents, and not always in the best way. Genetics mean nothing. It is the relationship that counts. And I'm going to leave us at that for tonight. And we'll spend the rest of our time before getting new notes on the different types of adoption. Because there are actually 4 different types of adoption that are common in our country. 4 different ways that we can care for orphans by bringing them into our family. All right. Mike, would you close us in prayer? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amen.